In the heart of the Obsidian Coliseum, silence tasted like copper. Commander Jackson Miller stood over the kneeling, blood-slicked form of Warlord Vaughn, his monomolecular blade steady against the giant's throat. 50,000 Vorshai held their breath as the smaller creature looked up at the royal box. How could a species with only 2 arms dismantle a god? Have you ever seen a storm break against a pebble? Tell me, do you believe that raw power is the only thing that matters in the dark between stars? 6 hours earlier, the High Court of Vorshai Coralpha had been filled with the scent of spiced nectar and the arrogance of 1,000 victories. Kalara watched her father from the lower dais, her bioluminescent sensors flickering a rhythmic, muted blue. The Archon Malachar was laughing. It was a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the crystal floor, a signal to his commanders that the war was as good as won. They spoke of the Terran enclave like a minor pestilence, a nuisance that had finally been cornered by the orbital blockade. Kalara tried to mimic his posture, her 3 hands folded neatly, but the chipped obsidian cooling stone felt slick and frantic in her palm. Her father spoke of the genetic hierarchy, explaining how the Terrans were a biological accident, a race of fragile-boned persistence hunters who lacked the kinetic weaponry evolved into Vorshai biology. A low hum. Then the heavy intake valves of the court hissed. Beneath the high crystal arches, the diplomatic delegation finally appeared. The metallic tang of the arena's recycled air filters scratched at the back of Kalara's throat, a sharp reminder of the station's recycled atmosphere. It was a scent she associated with tension. Ambassador Eris Vane walked with a slow, measured dignity, but it was the man behind him who drew every eye. Commander Jackson Miller didn't wear ceremonial silk. He wore matte black combat webbing scuffed by the red dust of worlds the hegemony had already tried to burn. Kalara watched him. Unlike the ambassadors of other conquered systems, Miller didn't stare at the crystal finery or the hovering weapon platforms. His eyes swept the room with a cold, terrifying efficiency. He was counting the guards. He was measuring the distance to the exits. He was assessing the structural integrity of the Archon's throne. It wasn't the gaze of a guest. It was the appraisal of a predator deciding which joint to strike first. The Archon's crown is crooked. The thought was cut short by the booming sound of the Colosseum doors locking into place. Malachar stood, his 4 arms spreading wide in a gesture that was half welcome and half threat. He spoke of the attrition the Terrans had suffered and the inevitable sunset of their sovereign space. He mocked their lack of natural armor and their reliance on soft-skin adaptability. Then he invoked the trial of the unyielding. It was an ancient law, a gamble of champions that the Vorshai used to break the spirits of those they couldn't break with fire. Warlord Vaughn stepped forward, a mountain of purple muscle and natural plates, his dual-bladed staff humming with energy. The court commanders jeered, their laughter a sharp, jagged noise in the high chamber. But the Terrans did not move. Miller gave a small, sharp nod to his ambassador. He stepped into the circle, his movements possessing a strange, fluid grace that made Kalara's sensors pulse a warning amber. If you want to see how the small and the stubborn redefine the galaxy, join us. We're cataloging every defiant breath here. The night before the trial, Kalara had risked everything. She breached the quarantine of the Terran transport to find the warrior, her heart's hammering against her ribs like trapped birds, off-limits and dangerous. The interior smelled of sterile air and something earthy that she couldn't name. She could not stop focusing on the rhythmic, annoying clicking of a loose floor panel in the diplomat's transport, while she asked Miller if he understood that Vaughn had never lost a challenge. Miller had just smiled, an expression that didn't reach his glacial eyes. He looked like a statue of salt, and told her that losing was a luxury humans could no longer afford. Now, in the heat of the second hour, the Colosseum floor was a map of Vaughn's exhaustion. I wonder if Terran fruit tastes like. The flash of the monomolecular blade cut the thought away. Miller didn't strike with the fury of a soldier. He struck with the cold precision of a surgeon preparing for a delicate cut. He was not trying to overpower the giant. He was waiting for the giant to die of his own strength. This was the physiological trap of the persistence hunt. an evolutionary strategy where the hunter utilizes superior cooling and metabolic efficiency to chase a more powerful creature until the prey's heart literally gives out from the sheer, unrelenting stress of being followed. Miller was the ghost that wouldn't vanish, the shadow that stayed in the corner of the eye. Vaughn's natural armor, plates meant to deflect kinetic slugs, was now acting as a localized heatsink that cooked his internal organs while his 4 lungs struggled to pull oxygen from the thinning atmosphere. He moved again. As the monomolecular edge hummed through the dense lattice of Vaughn's primary knee joint, the sound was less a strike and more a structural whisper, severing the deep tissue connections that allowed the warlord to support his massive, 4-legged frame on the shifting sands, while the crowd watched their champion's legacy unravel in a single, silent moment. Vaughn collapsed. The sound of his mountain-like body hitting the arena floor echoed louder than any jeer. And now, beneath the violet sky of Vorshai Coralpha, that secret conversation from the night, the forbidden fruit of her treason, was the only truth Kalara had left. Miller stood over the fallen god. He held the blade to Vaughn's primary carotid, his breathing rhythmic and terrifyingly steady. High Archon Malachar sat in a silence so thick it felt like physical pressure. His empire of muscle had been undone by a creature that simply refused to stop. Warlord Vaughn lowered his weapons. He yielded. Kalara stood and opened her hand. She placed the chipped obsidian cooling stone on the high marble ledge of the royal box. It no longer felt hot or frantic, just a piece of the world that had survived the crushing weight of the suns. Transformed and whole, the shadow it cast across the white stone was long and sharp. The cooling stone has finally found its rest. If you want to know what happens when the small refuse to break, subscribe and join us for the next chronicle.